Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Higher Living Podcast. Welcome to the final episode of 2022. Guys, it's been an absolute whirlwind of a year. We've been through the highest highs and the lowest lows and everywhere in between. And to commemorate this episode, the final episode of 2022, we're doing things a bit differently. The person that will be hosted today on the podcast will be yours truly, myself, sharing my story and giving you guys insight on why I have undertaken creating this platform and many other things about my life along the way. Now, you would probably be asking yourself, well, if Sean's going to be doing the talking, who's going to be doing the steering? And I've got none other than my great friend and colleague, who's also been a guest on our show by the name of Roy Gomo, who I trust with my life, to keep you guys well entertained and keep you guys afloat in terms of this specific episode. So, Roy, welcome once again to the Higher Living Podcast, my brother. It's so good to have you again.
Thank you so much, Sean. I feel very honored that you asked me to get involved in this episode and quiz you a bit about you, your life, and everything else. I think it's going to be a bit of a fun, hour just talking to you and hearing from you.
Yeah, and what I love about the relationship that we have is that it works so well in terms of us being on the same wavelength. So I'm really curious to see your viewpoints on certain aspects of my life and give me your input on certain aspects of my life. And sometimes it's so good. And in fact, all the time, it's so good to have a trusted friend, colleague, mentor, whatever you want to call it, to soundboard with and to learn lessons from. So yeah, Roy, once again, thank you from my side. I'm so honored to have you with me. But now, Mr. G, this is the part I've been waiting for. I hand over to you and I become the passenger, and I'm now in your hands, and we are all in your hands. So take us away.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. So, Sean, yeah, definitely, I do consider you to be a good friend. Like you said, we're colleagues. You're my boss. You're also a husband, a dad, and a business owner, amongst other things, right? And I would like us to touch through quite a few of these aspects of your life, your history, and all that. But I think what we need to do is start from the beginning, where you walk us through your journey from whenever you want to decide and up until now, and just give us a view. I'm sure people have heard snippets of your life in the other podcasts you've been involved in, but I think this is an important part where you actually take us in a bit more detail, in whatever order you decide. So let me hand over to you. Introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I was very blessed to be brought up in quite a close family. I have a sister. My mom and dad are still together, which I think is a blessing in today's world. And we were brought up, in a very firm household, if I can put it that way. The rules and regulations were quite tight. There were quite a lot of expectations around the rights and the wrongs, So I was brought up in a home that was quite structured, if I can put it that way. Coincidentally, my mom's dad, my grandfather, was an incredibly successful businessman. He was a pioneer within his generation, and he had done some amazing things in the business world during the course of his life, and his legacy lives on in many ways, in many things that are still unfolding in the Pretoria area of South Africa. And then this tycoon, this international business tycoon, who in the depths of apartheid was an international business tycoon, has his youngest daughter be approached by this gentleman that comes from Natal, that is basically hitchhiked his way up to Joburg, and with a guitar, a shiny pair of shoes, and quite a lot of spunk, if I can put it that way, which is my father, approaches the wealthiest man in the community, and then says to the wealthiest man in the community, "I'm going to marry your youngest daughter." The reason that I tell you this is because it sparked a complete outrage. It was almost like the Romeo and Juliet type of story where, there's these two people that come from polar opposite ends of the society and living conditions, if I can even put it that way. And they then fall in love, and they then choose to be together. And my father came from no education. He had no formal training. He had no matric. He had, like I say, he could play the guitar. He was incredibly charismatic, and he just had this way with people that made everyone gravitate towards him. So he then went on and got a job in the motor industry. And long story short, through hard work and resilience and grit and just sheer strength of character, he pushed ahead, and he, in his own right, became this incredibly successful businessman. And the reason that I give this background is because that afforded my sister and myself the opportunity to grow up in a household where we were very, very blessed, you know. And my dad and my mom, dad being at work most of the time, gave us everything that we would need materially, and mom being at home gave us everything that we would need emotionally, and was also that person that pushed us harder and harder and harder and harder to be better than they were, and to dream bigger than they dreamt, and just to give us the attitude to conquer the world kind of thing. And so my sister and I grew up in this environment. We grew up in the Randburg area. We were the first people of color, the first kids of color in our high schools, in our primary school, and then then things changed along the way. But so we grew up in a very, very blessed home, but we were not spoiled. So we had to work for everything that we wanted. My first pair of Nikes, I had to buy for myself. My sister and I had holiday jobs every holiday through most of our schooling career. We never got allowance. We always had to work for what we wanted. When I got a girlfriend eventually, and I say eventually like it's a terrible thing, but I mean when I eventually got a serious girlfriend, and I was traveling to see her, who is now my wife, I had to work to get the petrol to go and see her. And when I used to go and see her, she also had a very similar upbringing, and we had to share half a pizza and a Coke, and so we grew up in that environment. But during my early years in my schooling career, to summarize my schooling career, I was an absolute failure. I wasn't interested in academics. I had no interest in any subject at school. I matriculated with an average of, I think it was 41%, and it was not a great experience for me, the schooling system. I have very few fond memories of it from an educational side, but I've got amazing memories of it from a social side, because I was more interested in the socializing aspect and being mischievous aspect. So I consider myself a failure, and up till today, I consider myself a failure, and I'm proud to say that I'm a failure. And I guess that is sort of sets the tone for how things were after school. Matriculated, there was not much one could do with a 41% average. My parents basically said to me, well, we don't know what to do with you, so you go and figure it out. Somehow I saw this article in the paper, the Randburg Sun at that time, and it was this college in Mill Park that offered these bridging courses for people that hadn't met the grade for varsity, and they still wanted to get some sort of tertiary education. So not knowing what I was doing at the time, I immediately set up a meeting and took my parents to the open day to try and get them to, just get off my back about what I'm going to do, to be quite honest. So we go to this open day. And, being the slick talker that I can be at times, I somehow talked this guy into the guy that was running the school at the time into allowing me to have a go at the full curriculum without the bridging course. Somehow I managed to talk him into this. And he said to me, fine, I'll give you 6 months. In 6 months, you need to show me if you can make it. If you can't make it, we're going to have to revert you back to the bridging program. So I said, fine. At this point, my mom and dad basically backed off completely. They just said, right, go and get a student loan. If you're going to do this, you go and and I was actually pushing the fact to get a student loan, so that and for me at that point, I felt like if I took a student loan, then if things went belly up, at least it was on me. You know what I mean? It wasn't something that I was now yet again, to call it what it is, wasting their money, right? So be that as it may, I went and I got the student loan, and I started on this varsity college, and started doing really well. The first year did pretty well, got through. Second year did pretty well, and then halfway through the second year, an amazing thing happened. Something that I could never foresee happening. The college merged with another university, which was a Cambridge-based university, which gave the quality of the certification and the degree so much more weight. And when that happened, I started to take things a bit more seriously. And to be honest, I really wanted a nice car. And I realized that if I wanted a nice car, my dad was not going to buy it for me. So I needed to buy it myself. So that motivated me incredibly. And I eventually qualified. I flew through the final year. I did really, really well. And I started applying for work. I started applying for jobs. And those days it was those lovely things called the job mail. I don't know if you remember it, the classifieds. They had the thing called the job mail. You go through the thing, and then you got a phone. And eventually I found this recruiter, and this recruiter gets me this interview at this learning company. They specialize in electronic learning, which was quite new at that time, simulations and all of learner management systems and all of this sort of thing. But while I was going through varsity, I was working at the Hillflocks flea market. I used to sell gift wrap and Christmas trees and all sorts of other stuff at the Hillflocks flea market. So at that point in time, my only reference was working at this flea market. So I go for this interview in this fancy office in Woodmead, and the guy who's interviewing me says to me, tell me about a challenging time that you've had in your current work. And the only thing I can think of is like a example related to a Christmas tree. So being innocent at the time, I gave him this example of this Christmas tree plug that wasn't working, and then how I resolved it with a client that was quite upset, and he burst out laughing. And I think he could see the innocence and the honesty on my face, and he decided to give me the job. And and so I got the job there, and that's where my career started. And I was a technical consultant, and I was responsible for implementing these learning technologies, and I implemented them for many companies, many large companies across the country, which gave me unbelievable experience in hindsight. And I just focused on working as hard as I can, because I wanted to make myself as successful as possible so I could buy a nice car.
Did you buy the nice car?
So we get to the end of year one, where I've now been working for 12 months. I figure, okay, I've got a little bit of savings in my bank account because I've been saving for a nice car. And eventually I find this nice car. So I drive to Houghton to go and see this car, and it is gorgeous. Absolutely everything that I would want in a car. But the only problem is that the deposit that was required for the car was exactly the amount of money that I had in the bank. So it literally meant me emptying my bank account almost down to the cent to get this car. So I get back in the car I was using at the time, and I was driving on the highway, and I phoned my dad in the hope that I would get a loan here, You get a loan of some sort here. I phoned my dad, and I say to my dad, listen, Dad, I found this car. It's amazing. And my dad's in the motor industry, so he knows this guy, what type of car it is. And he's like, it's so lovely, and the condition is amazing. And the only problem is they want, at the time, 15,000 Rand deposit. And there's this awkward silence. And I'll never forget this. My dad says to me, so do you have the money, Sean? And in that moment, I knew exactly what he was saying. And I said to him, yes, I do have the money, but I knew it was every cent I had. So literally, we went and I bought this car, and I had every cent. I took every cent I had saved and I put it into this car, and there was a massive installment every month. But I look back on it now, and I think to myself, it was the best thing that I did, because what it did was fuel me now. Because after having this car, I thought it felt so amazing to accomplish this. This feeling of accomplishment just made me feel so good. I want more of this. And then I eventually left that job after 2 or 3 years working there. And I'd always had dreamt of working at Accenture. It has always been my dream to work at Accenture. I've always known people that have worked there, and from what they've told me, everyone used to tell me only the best people work at Accenture, only the best. And I've been to so many recruiters, and so many of the recruiters told me that I would never work at Accenture. They always said to me, your results are not good enough for Accenture, but we can find you other consulting companies. We can put you into Mac Consulting or to someone else. Not to say that Mac is not a top organization, so don't get me wrong if anyone from Mac is listening, but this is just the narrative I had at the time. And dude, the one thing that I don't do is I don't take instructions well, and I don't follow the crowd. So I found a way. I found a guy who was one of the chief recruiters at Accenture. I contacted him. I schmoozed him over LinkedIn. I went and asked him if I could come meet him for a coffee. And, I just used the assets that I have at my disposal, which was unfortunately not my great intellect, but it was my ability to connect with people. And he gave me an interview. I met with one of the senior directors, and boom, I got a job at Accenture.
Wow.
And, it's one of those times where everything you thought you wanted, you don't want. I lasted not very long at Accenture. Just the culture of the place didn't appeal to me. And coincidentally, the universe introduced me to a gentleman that had left Accenture for exactly a very similar reason. And he had started his own consulting firm, and it was a much smaller consulting firm. And I joined him. And that was the catalyst, the stepping stone for me, because that took me into the next level. Because now I wasn't learning how to be a consultant, I was learning how to run a consulting business. And he was my mentor for many years. And I worked for him for many years, and I enjoyed every minute of it. He inspired me, and he invested in me, and a lot of what I am today is because of him. And so I had that journey. The company was called Blue Platinum Consulting. It was an amazing organization. And then what tends to happen is once companies reach their peak, they sometimes can't sustain that, and then they decline. And they went through the decline. And when they went through the decline, I said to myself, I can't stick around. As much as I love the place, I can't stick around through the decline. I've also got my own commitments. I've got my own responsibilities. So I went on my own, and I started doing independent consulting. And it was me, myself, and I. And I got a gig at APSA when Maria Ramos took over, doing a piece of strategy implementation work. And that went really well. I did that for about a year and a half. And at that point, I had met these two other gentlemen. One was a chartered accountant, and one was an industrial psychologist. So they had quite complementary skill sets to me. And we decided that, we were going to start a business together. So it made sense for me at the time, because I had enough of being the consultant on site and doing the work and selling the work, and I needed something bigger. So I joined these two gentlemen, and we opened up a business. That business was called TSI, and we ran that business for about 3.5 years, and we did really, really well. And keeping with the spirit of this podcast, which is honesty and integrity and transparency, I can tell you the truth. And the truth is that we started to have some interpersonal issues. It sometimes happens when you win a big piece of work and you start to become quite successful. Then interpersonal challenges start to happen between partners. Long story short, at the end of 2013, there was mass resignation, and we closed the business. It was really not very pleasant. It was also at a time of my life when, the year 2014 was a pivotal point of my time, Roy, of my life, Roy. So in 2014, this business that I was in love with and, I contributed so much to fell apart. And in that falling apart, there were so many things that we needed to do in terms of making right on commitments that we had, our creditors and property and all of those sort of things, which was emotionally draining. My first child was born. We built a new house because our house wasn't big enough, and my first child was getting born. So all my money was tied up in this house, and my business had just gone bust. And I'd also been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, which means that I needed all of this medication, but I didn't really have the money to go and buy medication because business was really, there was no business. I used to sit at home every day. And life shows you, life has a way of taking you through ups and downs. And when you are sitting at home praying for a mail from Woolworths, just so that you can get an email in the day, that you haven't hit the greatest spot. And it was a very challenging time for me financially, emotionally. There was periods of days, like 2 days at a time, where I couldn't sleep. My wife used to ask me, why you're not sleeping? And the biggest mistake I did that I made at that time was I didn't tell her the truth. I didn't tell her the truth of what was happening. I thought I could fix it, thought I could fix it. So in no time, the little money that I had was nothing. And I was trying to find a job, and I was trying to sell my car, and luck would have it. The one day I was driving home and I met up in an accident. And so my car was damaged. So it was very difficult to sell it because who wants to buy a damaged car? But I didn't have the money to send it in to get it fixed because the excess was a couple of grand. And, a couple of grand when you have very little is a lot. So I was desperately trying to find a job, and I was driving around everywhere going for these interviews, but nobody would hire me. Eventually I got a gig. And when I got that new role, it was a new lease on life for me, because now it was what I call the rebuild. It was an opportunity for me I was never going to fail. It was never an option. I never thought it. That thought never crossed my mind ever. Even when I was at the garage filling 30 rand of petrol in my car, I knew I was going to make it. It was just a matter of time. I was never going to give up. I would have to stop breathing to give up. I was not prepared to do it. So I got this gig, and it wasn't the greatest, but it was a way in, and I took it with 3 arms, and I just went in like a hungry lion, and I delivered to the best of my ability and just networked and learned from all the mistakes that I had. And I started this business that I currently have, that we currently work in, 8 years ago. That was 2014. I started it at the McDonald's. And I mean, we've got 8 years later, we've got a wonderful business. We are financially stable. We employ some amazing people. And we really are very blessed to service some really good clients. And I'm just so privileged to work with the people that I do. That's really the story. I know I've talked a lot there, but that really is the story of how it's all come together till present day.
Yeah. No, this is quite interesting, because a lot of what you've touched on, I've actually never heard about this. I mean, I've known you for just over 5 years now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I've never heard a lot of this stuff, which is very, very interesting. I just want to go back to what you just spoke about when 2013, 2014, when you closed TSI and went through all that experience of losing everything and all the challenges with your health conditions, with your child being born, right?
Mm.
You spoke about your wife asking you, why you're not sleeping and you not being truthful about the state of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think as men, we've always gone through this thing of wanting to have everything under control.
Yeah.
Right. And I just want to get a bit more into your head around the thinking there, right? and how you handle it at the end in terms of your conversations with your wife, right? As well as what your lessons were after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, as men, we are so conditioned to being the providers, the strong ones, to not showing weakness, to not being emotional, to not talking about our problems, this is the way society has conditioned men. And I come from an upbringing where my dad is an incredibly strong man. So this is, the way we've been conditioned. At the time, I thought, firstly, how can I go to my wife and appear to be weak? And how can I go to my wife and appear to be this failure? I'm supposed to be the provider. There's this child on the way. How can I go there and do that? I can rather keep quiet and try and fix as much as I can so that I don't burden her with a sensitive husband who's going through trouble. I can just leave her be and leave her, happy while I sort this out in the background. And it was one of the worst decisions I ever made. And I'll tell you why. Because my wife had no idea that I was bleeding financially in the background. She could have helped. She could have supported me. We could have planned together. We could have done something together. We could have sold food on the side of the street. I'm just using an example, the Arbor example. We could have done something. The point I'm saying is we could have worked as a team. But it's the pride and that insecurity of not being a man that kept me quiet. And when we eventually talked about it years later, she said to me, how can we be in a partnership when the one partner doesn't know what the other partner is actually going through? That's not a partnership. And what I've learned about life and what I've learned about relationships is that relationships are you have to be in it for the good and the bad. Because there's not only good. Life is not only about sunshines and rainbows. It's about the dips. And when the dips come, you need to have a partner that's with you to ride that wave. Because likewise, if my partner was going through a dip, I would want to be there for them. So to come back to answering your question, it was a silly move. It was immaturity, but it was an important lesson for me to learn.
Yeah, and I guess it's a lesson that goes beyond just in the scope of your relationship with your wife. I think it's a lesson that goes beyond that in business, in other relationships as well. If you're partnering with somebody on something, whatever it is, there has to be some level of transparency, right? And accountability. Otherwise, you run into challenges. And it's interesting that you went and touched on that aspect of your life. In the same breath, right, you spoke about the positivity that you had during that time where you knew that something will eventually, come through, that everything will work out right. I just want to touch on that in terms of your psyche around always being positive despite the circumstances, right? Why do you think you always felt that something would work out? I mean, I speak to a lot of people, and you find a lot of people tend to choose the negative side of it and just say, life is at its worst, nothing will ever come right for me, and they just give up. But you never gave up. You actually kept pushing and trying to find something.
It's about, and we've talked about this numerous times on the podcast. For me, it's about having a vision. I could close my eyes and I could see what we call the business that we know today. I could see what it looks like. I could see what the office smells like. I could see everything crystal clear. I could see the people that work there. I could see the type of work we do. I could see everything. It was crystal clear. So the vision was so clear to me that there was just the work that was needed to be put in place to enable that vision. And I think that had the vision not been so clear in terms of why I got up, the why I got up out of bed every morning, I might not have got out of bed. I might have said, listen, tomorrow I'm just going to sleep. I feel sorry for myself. And why is this happening to me? But I believed so much in that vision, and I wanted that vision so badly that nothing was going to stop me. Nothing. I woke up every morning and that was the first thing on my mind. I went to sleep every night and that was the last thing on my mind. And the setback ignited the passion even more. The setback, and if I look at it now, right, I was not ready emotionally, mentally, even from a maturity perspective. I was not ready to run a business at the scale then. I was too young. I was too immature. I hadn't learned hard lessons. And it's almost like the universe brought me down to ground zero and said, right, let's see if you really want it. And if you manage to get there, and if you overcome all these hurdles, you will eventually get there. And I mean, it was never easy. It wasn't like in 2014, I started this business and boom, it wasn't. It was ups and downs and lefts and rights and bad decisions and good decisions. And it wasn't a linear process. It was like trying to navigate a minefield and, or a rock fall. If I could, that's actually a better analogy, a rock fall, because certain days you have to get over big challenges and other days are easy. And that's the life of an entrepreneur. And it's not about getting hit and falling down. It's about how much can you get it.
Yeah.
How many shots can you take, and you get up and you get up and you get up and you push on and you push on, regardless. But it all comes down to that why. If the why is strong enough, that will happen. If the why is not strong enough, or if there isn't a why, it won't happen.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's a very important point you make there, right? In terms of you will have challenges, right? Nothing is easy, right? But it's about pushing towards that goal, towards that vision, and seeing the progress towards it. Yes, some days might be slow, some days might take you a couple of steps back, but ultimately, in the long run, as you keep going, you're heading in the right direction, and you just deal with whatever challenges come as they come.
It's true. It's true. I think the challenge that a lot of people have is that they don't know the why, and they can't see the vision. And if you can see the vision, my question is always, how clearly can you see it? How intricate is it? And the more detailed it is, the more emotion it brings out, the more you attract it. And I'm not sure if you're a believer in affirmations. I'm not sure if you're a believer in manifestations. But you find a lot of successful sports people talk about the fact that they've seen something happen before it's happened. I've seen myself knock this guy out to become heavyweight champion of the world. Or I saw myself score this goal before it happened. And that is the intricacy of the vision. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, I've seen all of this and I've called for it before it's happened. For many years, not for a couple of days, for many, many years. When the times were the darkest is the harder I call. And I closed my eyes and I saw it and I could feel it, and you feel that emotion. I don't know if you can resonate with that, G.
No, I absolutely do. I mean, we've spoken many times and I've spoken about energies, right? I remember reading a book some time back. They spoke about energies and what you focus on, right? Whatever you entertain the most, right, is what you'll attract to yourself. So whatever energies you also, push towards or think about or focus on will also, gravitate towards you. So yes, in full, I totally resonate with what you're saying. And it's sad because you see some people who will always lean towards the negative, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is what they end up experiencing. I guess it's an exposure thing. I guess it's how much you want the good things, right? When I say good, I'm not talking just about the nice things about this. I'm talking holistically, right? How much you want it, and once you know exactly what you want, and you're not willing to entertain anything else, right? Ultimately, things will come into fruition, right?
It's so true. And if I could go back to myself, my younger self, the one thing that I would, because people, the one piece of advice I would give myself is, don't only focus on your career. Don't only focus on the material, because that's easy to focus on. Easy to close your eyes and see yourself driving a Ferrari or whatever it is, or whatever people want. Focus on balance. So remember, it's everything in your life exists within an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is governed by balance. So the minute something is out of balance, the minute your income is sky high, it has to balance out somewhere else. So maybe you're losing time with your family, maybe you're losing time with you taking care of yourself, maybe you're losing time with your hobbies, whatever it may be. Similarly, if that other side, if you're spending all your time on your hobbies and your family and your friends, maybe your earning potential is low. So when you're visioning and when you're thinking and when you're planning and when you're doing all of these things, think about what a happy equilibrium is, you know.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something quite personal. When I was growing up and when I was, coming through the ranks, this was one of my visions. I visioned myself waking up every morning and walking down, because I love cars, walking downstairs into my garage, and my garage was almost like a warehouse. And I'd have this bucket of keys, and I would then put my hand inside this bucket of keys and pull out a key to this massive amount of cars that are there. And I wouldn't know which key it was. And I'd press a button, and then somewhere down there, a light would go off, and then I know, okay, that's the car I'm going to use today. That was the immature Sean that was completely focused on material, wanting that.
Yeah.
Would I want that today? Hell no. Not a chance. I wouldn't want anything close to that, because to have that requires so much investment into everything that you're doing to maintain that, from your career perspective, that you probably don't have much life anywhere else. I'd rather just be a normal person and still have time with my family, still have time with my friends, still play my sport, and have my life in balance,
Yeah. No, you make a good point, and it's interesting you talk about that balance, right? But I'll come back to the balance part, right? Because I've got a couple of questions there, but still focusing on the vision, right? In as much as your view of the warehouse of cars, right, that you had in terms of this is what I want, right? If we take a step back and we look at that, to me it seems like from the onset, from when you were young, you always had these, let me say, outrageous, visions of what you wanted your life to be like, right? Which means you were pushing for much higher goals than most people would, right? Would you say that is a trait that was ingrained in you, right? Whether it's cars, whether it's just success in business, whether it's whatever it is it a trait that you think was ingrained in you early on, that's been a part and parcel of your success to date?
Absolutely. I think there's two facets to it. I think the one is that, I come from, my father and my grandfather are very successful business people, so there's a genetic component to that. But I must be honest, my mother pushed us, my sister and I, incredibly hard. She drove us to be the best, even though I wasn't. But you know what they say is when your parents stop parenting you, you start parenting yourself.
Yeah.
And you start parenting yourself in the same way. And I just pushed myself more and more. And at a certain point, and I think honestly, this is why I was the universe gave me this autoimmune condition, which I'll live for the rest of my life. Because at a certain point of my life, I thought I was invincible and I could just I could conquer the world. And when I got this condition, it took me 3 years before I could talk to anybody about it. I never told anyone except my wife. I couldn't talk about it. It was just devastating to me. But now when I think about it, it was the most wonderful thing, because it's so humbling to have something like that, because it shows you how precious life is, and it shows you that life is not only about material. But to come back to your question, yeah, I think that parenting and how we parent our children is incredibly important, and I must say my mom really pushed us to be the best we could.
Yeah, it sounds like you had proper grounding with your parents there. I mean, your dad on one side, not willing to spoon feed you even though he could afford to, and your mom pushing you to do the best. When it comes to your grandfather, right? How much time did you spend with him? Because obviously he was your first port of call in terms of a gauge in terms of how successful a business can be.
I was very blessed to spend quite a lot of time with him. We were quite a close family, so we did spend quite a lot of time with him. He did scare us quite a bit when we were growing up, to be honest, because he was he was very yes, he was ambitious on another level. There's another level of ambitious, and he dreamt the world so big, and it was incredible. Yeah, so I did spend a lot of time with him, and his legacy lives on by the fact that I go places and people still tell me so much about him, even the fact that even though he passed away many years ago. So yeah, I was blessed to have insight and be exposed to people like that at a young age.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's always interesting to hear, good stories about your parents, your grandparents, as you go from place to place. And I'm sure your kids will have, the same experience when they move around and they hear people talk about you. And I can only say this because I know you personally. Yeah. So I think let's jump back to balance in life, right? So obviously we know what you've done professionally. We know, what you've done as a business owner, right? Let's talk about the balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Considering that you've got a health condition, whatever, what do you do to stay fit?
I'm very blessed to have a great balance in my life, which I enforce. Balance is either you take accountability for it. Most people outsource that accountability to their boss or to their career, and they say they don't have time. I'm not a believer in that. I think that if you want balance in your life, you need to make it. So for me, my family come first. I'm a family man, and to stay fit, I play golf, which I love to death. It's my favorite sport. I go to the gym a couple of times a week. I take a serious accountability for my health. Not to say that we don't all go crazy from time to time, but yeah, I find that balance in sport. I find the balance with my family. I find that balance with friends. Yeah, and I find that balance honestly in also giving back. And I think this podcast is something that really takes me away from, the normality of everyday life and puts me into somebody else's world. Today it's a little bit different, but I love it, and it's such an amazing conversation to have with someone, and just seeing life from someone else's eyes it's a beautiful thing, and I love it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, we've had a few exchanges regards keeping fit and all that, exchanging workout routines and all that. And we've both gained weight at some point and then lost weight at some point.
Oi, you're not supposed to be giving away my secrets here. We didn't agree on you talking about my weight condition, but you will be happy to know that I am back in shape now.
Don't worry, we all struggle with the same thing. And besides,
Yeah.
we're being transparent here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump back to the professional side, right? Let's look at the business, right? What is the biggest lesson you've learned in business that you was surprising to you?
That's a good question, man. Could have prepped me on this one. Okay. The biggest thing I've learned in business is that it's always about the jockey and it's not about the horse. That goes for people that you do business with. That goes for people in their skill sets that you employ. That goes for your clients. That goes for everyone. It is the jockey that makes the difference. And it is the relationships that one has amongst the community of jockeys in the ecosystem of business that makes it successful. If you look at our relationship transcends the business. Even though it is a business relationship, it transcends that. Why? Because you and I have got a very similar set of values. You and I see business very similarly, and we both believe in the same principles. Therefore, our business together will be successful. We might not always have the right ingredient or the right product, but us working together will always be successful. You agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if I talk about our relationship, right, what I've found and what I've learned about you, right, is we can still talk about the serious issues, right? We divorce the person from the issue, we deal with the issue, right? And we can still come back and laugh about the situation, right? Without taking away from the work that needs to happen or the seriousness of the situation. And I think that's a big thing. That's an important aspect in terms of how you approach things. That you still don't take some things personally that most people would take personally, and you're able to move beyond that and still push.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what it is? It's I really believe in the principle of sharing and making everyone successful. You know, the way I look at it is like if our clients are successful and the people doing their work is successful and everyone in the delivery team is successful, I am successful. And if everyone's successful, it's beautiful business. But if one person in that chain is getting screwed, it is not beautiful business and it's set up for failure and it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And that's why the one needs, and I think it's something that I find, and I hate to say this, but I find it so difficult to do business as freely as I used to be able to, because Roy, the honest truth is that there's some people out there you just can't trust.
Yeah.
And I am so paranoid about letting anyone into my ecosystem that I cannot trust, because you know, it's just and you and I believe in this principle of sharing, right?
Yeah.
Everything in this business is around sharing. We share with each other, we share with our clients, we share with everything. Knowledge, skills, everything gets shared. It's a family. But not everyone sees it that way. Many people see it as a transaction. And, you know, each to their own, right? Each to their own. I've just found that when you collaborate for mutual benefit, in fact, the partnering for mutual benefit has made this business of mine a success. That's what's made it successful.
Yeah.
And keeping to our word. So if we owe Roy R1, we pay Roy R1. I wish it was R1, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. But you get the point.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
Old school values, man. Word.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, I mean, like I've spoken to quite a few people around this. The burden that you have as an individual or a business, right? If you're the only entity or person that's successful in that environment, the burden upon you becomes like 100-fold.
Sure.
Because then everybody in that ecosystem, right, looks at you now and expects you to assist them or help them in whatever they need help in. And that alone is a lot of pressure for an individual or an entity to run with. But like you said, if everybody within that ecosystem is also successful, then that burden is shared.
Absolutely.
Right? Everybody is happier, and we all achieve everything that we want to achieve. I mean, without so much self-reliance on me, myself, and I.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You know, you sent me a video once on WhatsApp, and it was, I don't know if you realized it because you sent it to me as a joke. And I think we were still joking about it. And it was about that guy that was in a fancy car and he was driving down the street. And then this guy walks up to him, another guy with a camera, and says, "Shoot, you must be really successful to drive a car like this." And the guy says, "Yes, I am." So then he says, "So what's your secret to success?" And the guy sitting in the car, the wealthy guy, replies, and he says, "When you find people you can trust, you hold on to them and you make life good for them, because they'll make life good for you."
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
You remember that video?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Roy, that video has stuck with me. It's like in my DNA now.
Yeah. And it makes sense. Eh? It makes sense because the relationship you create, right? If they're genuine, right, and they're reciprocal, those are the ones that you definitely would want to have going forward.
Yeah.
The transactional ones, right? The minute the transaction is done, it's done.
It's done. It's done, and there's no longevity in it. There's no, what I don't like about the transactional type relationships is it's short-sighted.
Yeah.
And unless there's a misalignment of values and things like that, then fair enough, transactional all the way.
Yeah.
But if you can have these deep relationships transcend borders, boundaries. They are relationships that can go into the future. Because just say you've got 10 people in your network that you can trust, that you work with, that have the same values. Regardless of where those 10 people are in the world, you can still work together.
Exactly. Yeah.
The network then expands. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. It's not about what you can get from a network, it's what you can give. And the minute you change that and you start giving to your network and you start empowering your network and you start to forge these bonds, you actually have got portability. You can actually have a business anywhere in the world. You can do business anywhere in the world. You can do anything you want using skill sets from different continents because you've got these hooks into these parts of the world,
Yeah.
And it can be, a network is such a powerful thing. And I always tell the guys that work with me here at HQ that focus on your network, man. It's knowing a lot is great, but if you don't have any way to take what you know to make value of it, what's the point?
Exactly.
Roy, it's can you believe we're done with an hour?
It felt more like 10 minutes.
Felt more like 10 minutes, man. It really did. And Mr. G, my brother, I thank you so much for doing this with me. I know it just probably came out of left field for you, but you are the guy that I trust to lead me down this path and this conversation. And what makes it so special is, like you said, we've been together 5.5 years now, and it's like, it just feels like yesterday. And our relationship after 5.5 years is just stronger than ever to me. And I hope you feel the same way. And I'm just so honored to have you with me on the show.
No, thank you. I mean, the feeling is mutual, and definitely very grateful for you inviting me to sit on the other side of the mic questioning you today.
Yeah, and now for me, I'm not one to open up about all sorts of things, but now it seems like everything's out there. So one has to step out of their comfort zone. But good people, it's December. I think it's been a difficult year and a challenging year for a lot of people, but an extremely rewarding one for most. So take the lessons, learn the lessons, take it on the chin if it's been some hard ones. The beautiful part about December is that there's an opportunity for rebirth around the corner. Don't do it now. Take a few days, decompress, go on leave. If you're not going on leave, take some time out, and on New Year's Eve or early next year, do your planning for the next year. But don't do it now, it's too soon. And just decompress. So guys, I bid you farewell from the Higher Living podcast. It's been an absolute whirlwind year again. For us, it's been fantastic. It's been completely unbelievable for me. I've loved every second of it. I'm absolutely in my element. And I thank you for your listenership, and I thank you for being part of this journey. And we have lots in store for you next year. So just remember, if you do one thing only, and that's stay inspired. Cheers.